The dust-laden wind carried Willow Harper's desperate prayers across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory as she clutched her newborn daughter to her breast, the fifth girl born to her in 7 years of marriage. The year was 1872, and on this merciless autumn day, her husband Silas stood before her, his face contorted with rage and disappointment as he hurled her meager belongings onto the dirt outside their homestead. 5 girls, Silas bellowed, his voice carrying across the open landscape. 5 useless mouths to feed and not a single son to work this land. His weathered face, once handsome in the glow of their courtship, had grown hard and cruel with each daughter Willow had borne. "Please, Silas," Willow begged, her voice trembling as she held baby Ruth against her shoulder. Their 4 other daughters, Sarah, Mary, Elizabeth, and Hannah, huddled behind their mother, tears streaming down their dirt-smudged faces. "Where will we go? Winter is coming." "That's no concern of mine," Silas spat, adjusting his suspenders with calloused hands. "I need a woman who can give me sons." "You've failed me for the last time." He turned toward the house where Willow could see the young widow from the neighboring farm, barely 20 years old, waiting in the doorway with a smug expression. "You cannot mean to cast out your own flesh and blood," Willow said, her voice growing stronger despite the fear clutching at her heart. "Watch me," he responded coldly, tossing her a small cloth pouch that jingled with a few coins. "That's more charity than you deserve." Silas's final act of cruelty was hitching their old wagon to their most temperamental mule, Bessie, a beast notorious for her stubborn disposition and unpredictable temper. The rickety wagon contained little: some worn clothing, cooking utensils, 2 threadbare blankets, and a small sack of cornmeal and dried beans. He wouldn't even spare a hunting rifle, claiming it too valuable for women who wouldn't know how to use it. As the homestead disappeared behind them, Willow fought back tears that threatened to blind her. At 30 years old, with 5 daughters ranging from newborn to 7 years, she faced the cruel reality of frontier life for a woman alone. The nearest town, Clearwater Springs, lay 40 miles east, but Willow knew better than to seek refuge there. Everyone knew Silas Harper's family, and his influence with the local sheriff would mean no sympathy for his cast-off wife. "Where are we going, Mama?" Sarah, the eldest at 7, asked as she sat beside her mother on the wagon bench, trying to sound brave though her small voice quivered. Willow swallowed hard. "West," she answered simply. "To new beginnings." She had heard tales of Silver Creek, a growing settlement another 100 miles to the west, where no one would know them or their shame. The first night on the trail, Willow made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a creek. The October air carried a biting chill, and she knew their journey would become more dangerous with each passing day as winter approached. After settling the girls with a meager meal of cornmeal mush, Willow stepped away from the flickering campfire to finally release the sobs she'd been suppressing all day. The vast Wyoming sky spread above her like a canvas of indifference, the stars cold and distant. Her parents had warned her against marrying Silas Harper, seeing through his charming exterior to the selfish ambition beneath. But she had been young and foolish, believing love could change him. Now, her daughters would pay the price for her mistake. "I won't let them suffer," she whispered to the night, a fierce determination rising within her. Drying her tears, Willow returned to the wagon, retrieving a small leather-bound journal, her most prized possession, from beneath her clothing. By the campfire's light, she began to write, documenting their journey and her plans for their future. If they were to survive, she needed every ounce of courage and resourcefulness she possessed. The first 3 days passed without incident, though Bessie the mule lived up to her cantankerous reputation, stopping frequently and requiring coaxing to continue. The girls helped as best they could, with Sarah and 5-year-old Mary gathering kindling for fires while Elizabeth, just 4, watched baby Ruth when Willow needed her hands free. On the 4th day, disaster struck. While crossing a swollen stream, Bessie became frightened by a water snake and reared violently, overturning the wagon. Willow barely had time to grab Ruth from her makeshift cradle before the wagon tipped, spilling their precious supplies into the rushing water. "Girls, to the bank!" Willow shouted, holding Ruth high as she waded through the knee-deep water. She counted heads frantically: Sarah, Mary, Elizabeth, but 3-year-old Hannah was nowhere to be seen. "Hannah!" Willow screamed, her heart seizing with terror as she scanned the water's surface. Then she spotted her. The little girl had been thrown downstream and clung to a protruding branch, her terrified face just above the water. Without hesitation, Willow thrust baby Ruth into Sarah's arms. "Stay here," she commanded, and plunged back into the stream, fighting the current as she made her way to Hannah. The child's grip was weakening, her small fingers white with strain. "Hold on, my love," Willow called, pushing forward with all her might. Just as Hannah's fingers slipped, Willow lunged forward, catching her daughter's dress and pulling her close. The current swept them both several yards downstream before Willow found footing and staggered to the opposite bank, clutching Hannah tightly against her chest. They were alive, but their situation had worsened dramatically. The wagon lay on its side, half submerged, while Bessie had broken free and disappeared. Most of their supplies were gone, carried away by the relentless current. All that remained was what Willow had stored in a watertight tin box: matches, her journal, a small knife, and the pouch of coins Silas had thrown at her. As the sun began to set, Willow built a small fire on the bank where they were stranded, gathering her daughters close for warmth. Hannah shivered violently despite being wrapped in Willow's shawl, and baby Ruth fussed constantly, hungry for milk that was becoming increasingly scant due to Willow's own hunger and stress. "Are we going to die, Mama?" Mary asked in a small voice as darkness fell. Willow pulled her daughters closer, fighting back her own fear. "No, my darling. We're just having an adventure, and all adventures have difficult parts. Tomorrow will be better." But as she stared into the fire, Willow wondered if she had just told her first lie as a mother. Without the wagon, with dwindling supplies and winter approaching, their chances of reaching Silver Creek or anywhere else were diminishing rapidly. Dawn broke with a cold clarity that matched Willow's resolve. They couldn't stay by the stream. They needed to find help. Gathering what little remained of their possessions, she fashioned a sling for Ruth from a torn piece of her petticoat and distributed small bundles to each of the older girls. "We're going to walk until we find a farm or a town," she explained, trying to infuse her voice with a confidence she didn't feel. "We'll follow the sun westward just like we planned." The day proved brutal. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, with rocky outcroppings and steep hills that left even Willow breathless. By midday, the girls' initial determination had given way to exhaustion. Hannah had to be carried, alternating between Willow's arms and her back, while the others dragged their feet, their small faces pinched with hunger and fatigue. That night, they sheltered beneath an overhanging rock. Willow managed to catch 2 small fish in a stream using her hands and patience, a skill her Cherokee grandmother had taught her long ago. The modest meal did little to satisfy their hunger, but provided enough strength to continue. For 3 more days they traveled westward, each step more difficult than the last. Willow's milk had nearly dried up, leaving Ruth constantly hungry and fretful. Hannah's cough, which had begun after her dunking in the stream, worsened steadily. The other girls remained brave but grew quieter with each passing hour. On the afternoon of the fourth day after losing the wagon, as they crested a hill, Willow spotted a thin column of smoke in the distance. Hope surged through her weary body. "Look, girls," she said, pointing to the horizon. "Smoke means people. We're going to find help." Summoning their last reserves of strength, they made their way toward the smoke. As they drew closer, Willow could make out a small cabin nestled against a stand of pines, with a corral containing several horses. A cattle ranch, or perhaps a line shack for cowboys working the range. Approaching cautiously, Willow was suddenly aware of their appearance ragged, dirty, and desperate. Pride made her hesitate, but the thought of her daughter's suffering pushed her forward. Before they reached the cabin door, it swung open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the interior light. A man stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but not raised. "That's far enough," he called, his voice deep and wary. "State your business." Willow stopped, instinctively gathering her daughters behind her, Ruth still cradled against her chest. "My name is Willow Harper. These are my daughters. Our wagon overturned in a stream 4 days back. We've lost everything and need help." The admission cost her dearly, but there was no disguising their desperate situation. The man took several steps forward, and Willow could finally see him clearly. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in the way of men who worked hard for a living. His face, partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, revealed keen eyes studying them intently. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' growth of beard. After a moment that stretched like an eternity, he lowered his rifle. "5 little girls," he said softly, almost to himself, and something in his expression shifted. He placed his rifle against the porch rail and approached slowly, as one might a frightened animal. When he stood before Willow, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, he removed his hat in a gesture of respect that nearly undid her composure. "My name's Jackson Grayson," he said, "and I've been waiting for you." Willow's exhaustion and fear instantly transformed into suspicion. "What do you mean, you've been waiting for us?" she asked, taking an instinctive step backward. "No one knew we were coming this way." Her mind raced with stories of bandits and worse who preyed on vulnerable travelers in these isolated territories. Jackson Grayson's weathered face creased into a gentle smile. "I didn't mean it like that, madam," he clarified, keeping his distance when he sensed her wariness. "I just meant, well, I've been out here alone for nearly 2 years now. Been praying for some kind of change, some purpose beyond just surviving day to day." He gestured toward the cabin. "And here you appear, needing exactly what I have to offer: shelter and safety." The sincerity in his eyes made Willow want to believe him, but caution born of hard experience kept her guarded. "We don't need charity, Mr. Grayson. Just a place to rest for a night or two and perhaps work in exchange for food." Hannah's cough suddenly worsened, the child doubling over with the force of it. Without hesitation, Jackson stepped forward, kneeling to the little girl's level. "That sounds like chest trouble," he said, his brow furrowing with concern. "My sister had similar spells as a child." He looked up at Willow. "She needs to be warm and dry, and I've got pine tar and honey that might ease her breathing." Something in his genuine concern for Hannah began to melt the ice around Willow's heart. Still, she hesitated. "Mrs. Harper," Jackson said softly, standing again and meeting her eyes directly. "I understand your caution. These are dangerous times, especially for a woman alone with children. But I swear on my mother's grave, you'll come to no harm under my roof. If it makes you feel safer, I'll sleep in the barn tonight." Sarah tugged at Willow's skirt. "Mama, I'm so tired," she whispered, her small face pale with exhaustion. The decision made itself. "We accept your hospitality, Mr. Grayson," Willow said formally. "And I'd be grateful for anything to help Hannah's cough." Relief flooded Jackson's face. "Then let's get you all inside before night falls completely. There's stew on the stove, and it's not fancy, but it's hot." The cabin, though small, was remarkably clean and well organized. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area to its right. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs occupied the center of the main room, while a curtain separated what appeared to be a sleeping area at the back. Everything spoke of careful maintenance, from the swept wooden floor to the neat stack of firewood beside the hearth. "It's not much," Jackson said, suddenly self-conscious as he bustled about, adding wood to the fire and stirring the pot of stew hanging over the flames. "But it's solid and keeps the weather out." Within an hour, the transformation in the Harper women was remarkable. Faces and hands washed in warm water, bellies filled with hearty beef stew, and bodies warmed by the crackling fire had restored some color to their cheeks. Jackson had produced an old trunk containing clothing that had belonged to his sister. She married and moved to California 2 years ago, and Willow had gratefully accepted clean garments for her daughters. Hannah's cough remained worrisome, but Jackson had mixed pine tar, honey, and a small amount of whiskey, heating it gently before allowing the child to breathe the steam. The treatment seemed to ease her breathing somewhat, though Willow kept her close, monitoring her throughout the evening. As the girls began to nod off, Jackson efficiently arranged sleeping spaces. The cabin's single bed was given to Willow and her daughters, while he prepared a pallet for himself near the fire. "I'll head out to the barn once you're settled," he assured Willow as she tucked the girls into the surprisingly comfortable bed. "That's not necessary, Mr. Grayson," Willow replied, surprising herself. "The floor by the fire is perfectly acceptable for you. It's your home, after all." Something about this quiet, competent man had begun to ease her fears. Perhaps it was the way he had knelt to speak to each of her daughters at their own level, or how he had carefully measured milk from his cow into a cup for Ruth without being asked. Later, as the cabin settled into nighttime silence, Willow found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She slipped carefully from the bed, ensuring the girls remained covered and warm, and moved to sit in one of the chairs by the now banked fire. Jackson, who had been lying on his pallet gazing at the ceiling, sat up when he heard her movement. "Everything all right, Mrs. Harper?" he asked quietly. Willow nodded, drawing her borrowed shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "I just needed a moment to think," she admitted. "The past days have been overwhelming." Jackson nodded, remaining seated on his pallet to maintain a respectful distance. "Would you mind telling me how you came to be traveling alone with 5 young children? It's not my place to pry, but knowing might help me assist you better." Something about the darkness and the crackling embers made confession easier. Willow found herself relating the whole bitter story: her marriage to Silas Harper, his growing resentment with each daughter born, and finally, his cruel dismissal after Ruth's birth. "He wanted sons to work the land," she concluded, her voice hollow with the pain of rejection. "Girls were worthless to him, and so was I for bearing them." Jackson's face had grown increasingly somber as she spoke, his jaw tightening visibly at points. When she finished, he remained silent for several moments, staring into the fire. "Your husband," he finally said, his voice carefully controlled, "is a fool of the highest order." The unexpected declaration startled a small laugh from Willow. "That's certainly one way to put it." "It's the kindest way I can think of," Jackson responded, a hint of steel beneath his gentle tone. "Any man blessed with 5 healthy children and a strong, capable wife who would endure the hardships you've described should be on his knees in gratitude, not casting them aside like unwanted baggage. The simple vindication in his words soothed something raw within Willow's soul. For too long, she had internalized Silas's disappointment, wondering if there was indeed something deficient in her that resulted in daughter after daughter. To hear someone a stranger, no less so, firmly reject that notion was unexpectedly healing. "Where were you headed?" Jackson asked after a comfortable silence had settled between them. "Silver Creek," Willow replied. "I'd heard it's a growing town where we might find work and a fresh start." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "It's about 60 miles west of here. Decent place from what I've seen on my supply runs. They've got a schoolhouse now and a proper doctor." He hesitated, then added, "But with winter coming on and Hannah's cough, it's not a journey to undertake lightly." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Willow knew he was right. Continuing their journey immediately would be foolish, perhaps fatal. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Grayson?" she asked directly. "Stay here, at least until spring," he said without hesitation, as though the offer had been forming in his mind throughout their conversation. "The cabin's small, but we could expand it, add another room off the side. I've got the lumber already cut, was planning to build a storage shed, but this is more important. You and the girls would have privacy, and there's plenty of work on a ranch to occupy everyone." Willow studied his face, searching for hidden motives. "And what would you expect in return for such generosity?" Jackson met her gaze steadily. "Company," he answered simply, "and help with the cooking and household tasks, if you're willing. Ranching doesn't leave much time for keeping a proper home, as you can probably tell." He gestured around the cabin which, while clean, lacked many of the touches that transformed a shelter into a home. "That's all," Willow pressed, still wary. "That's all," he confirmed. Then, with a hint of humor crinkling the corners of his eyes, he added, "Well, and maybe teaching me to make bread that doesn't come out hard as a rock. I've been trying for months with dismal results." The absurdity of the request, combined with his earnest expression, broke through Willow's remaining reserve. She laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even her with its freedom. "I think I can manage that, Mr. Grayson." "Jackson," he corrected gently. "If we're to share a home for the winter, even temporarily, Mr. Grayson seems overly formal." "Jackson," Willow repeated, testing the name. "And I'm Willow." As if to seal their agreement, Hannah coughed from the bed, the sound less harsh than before but still concerning. "We should both get some sleep," Jackson said, settling back onto his pallet. "Tomorrow will be busy if we're to expand the cabin before the first snow." Willow nodded and returned to the bed, carefully positioning herself among her sleeping daughters. As she drifted toward sleep, she realized the knot of fear that had been her constant companion since Silas cast them out had loosened slightly. For the first time in days, perhaps even months, she allowed herself to hope. True to his word, Jackson began work on the cabin expansion the very next morning. After a breakfast of flapjacks that had the girls wide-eyed with delight, "We haven't had sugar in ages," Sarah explained when Jackson looked puzzled at their enthusiasm. He set about measuring and marking the eastern wall of the cabin, where the new room would be attached. Willow, determined not to be idle, tackled the cabin's interior. Though clean, it lacked organization and the small touches that created comfort. With the older girls helping to dust and sweep, she rearranged furniture, hung the few dishcloths on pegs near the wash basin, and discovered a forgotten quilt in a trunk that brightened the space considerably when draped over the back of a chair. By midday, Jackson had positioned the first supporting posts for the addition. Willow brought him water and watched as he worked, struck by the efficiency of his movements. Unlike Silas, who had approached physical labor with resentful obligation. Jackson seemed to find satisfaction in the building process, stepping back periodically to assess his progress with critical but pleased eyes. "You're good at this," she observed, handing him a tin cup of cool water. "Had to be," he replied, taking a grateful drink. "Out here, if something needs doing, you either learn how or go without." He gestured toward the garden patch visible behind the cabin. "Same with growing food. First year, nearly starved before I figured out what would actually thrive in this soil. And now, root cellars full of potatoes, carrots, and turnips," he said with pride. "Enough to see us through winter, especially with the preserved meat and the milk from Daisy." He nodded toward the small barn where his cow was housed. The casual "us" didn't escape Willow's notice. Already, Jackson was thinking of them as a unit, a household facing the coming winter together. The thought should have alarmed her, but instead, it provided an unexpected comfort. Hannah's condition improved steadily over the following days with regular doses of Jackson's pine tar and honey remedy, supplemented by rich milk and hearty meals. Within a week, her cough had subsided to occasional spells, usually at night, and color returned to her pale cheeks. The cabin addition progressed rapidly under Jackson's skilled hands. Willow found herself impressed not only by his carpentry skills, but by his consideration in planning the space. Without prompting, he incorporated features specifically for the girls' low pegs for their clothing, a wide shelf that could serve as a play area on inclement days, and small windows positioned to catch the morning light. "My father built homes," he explained when Willow commented on his attention to detail. "I worked alongside him from the time I could hold a hammer steady. He always said a house should serve the people living in it, not the other way around." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Willow said, helping him position a ceiling beam. "He was," Jackson agreed, a flash of old grief crossing his features. "Lost him and my mother to fever the same week 6 years ago. After that, there wasn't much keeping me in Kentucky. Headed west with my sister and her husband, but when they continued to California, I decided to put down roots here instead." Alone, Willow couldn't imagine choosing solitude in this vast, sometimes hostile landscape. Jackson secured the beam before responding. "Not by preference," he admitted. "But finding a wife out here isn't simple. The few unmarried women in these parts are either too young or—" He hesitated, searching for words. "Not interested in a rancher's life," Willow suggested. "More like not interested in a man who doesn't frequent saloons or make grand promises," Jackson said with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm not much for pretense or town life. Most women want more excitement than I can offer." Willow thought of her own girlhood dreams, how Sela's had seemed exciting and full of ambition compared to the steady, reliable men her parents had encouraged her to consider. How differently her life might have unfolded had she valued substance over flash. "Perhaps those women don't understand what truly matters," she said quietly, passing him another nail. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps of shared values beneath their different circumstances. Jackson cleared his throat and returned his attention to the beam, but Willow noticed the pleased set of his shoulders as he worked. By mid-November, the addition was complete, a snug room with space for 2 beds, cleverly positioned to receive warmth from the cabin's main fireplace through a grated opening in the wall. Jackson had even managed to install a small window facing east, so the first light of day would filter through. "It's perfect," Willow said sincerely when he showed her the finished space. "Better than I could have imagined." "There's one more thing," Jackson said, gesturing for her to follow him outside. Behind the cabin, he had constructed a small covered area adjoining the garden. For laundry and outdoor work, he explained. The roof will keep off rain and snow, but the open sides allow air circulation for drying clothes. The thoughtfulness of the addition, clearly designed with her specific needs in mind, touched Willow deeply. "You've thought of everything," she said, blinking away unexpected tears. Jackson shrugged, looking pleased but embarrassed by her emotion. "Just practical considerations. Winter's long out here, best to be prepared." That evening, as the first significant snowfall of the season began blanketing the landscape, the expanded cabin felt remarkably like a home. Jackson had shot a wild turkey that morning, and Willow had roasted it to perfection, accompanied by potatoes from the root cellar and the last of the autumn squash. The girls, who had initially been shy around Jackson, now chattered freely at the dinner table, sharing stories and asking endless questions about ranch life. "You have to milk Daisy every single day?" Elizabeth wanted to know. "Even on Sundays?" Mary added, wide-eyed. Jackson nodded solemnly. "Twice daily without fail. Cows don't take holidays." "Can I learn to milk her?" Sarah asked, always eager for new responsibilities. "If your mother approves, I'd be glad to teach you," Jackson replied, glancing at Willow for confirmation. The easy domesticity of the scene struck Willow suddenly. In just a few weeks, this stranger had become something approaching family to them all. The girls looked to him with growing trust and affection, while she herself had come to rely on his steady presence and quiet strength. It should have frightened her, this rapid integration into his life. Instead, it felt like finding solid ground after years of treading water. With Sila's, she had always felt the need to prove her worth, to apologize for her failures. With Jackson, simply existing seemed sufficient. Any contribution she made was met with genuine appreciation rather than grudging acknowledgement. Later, after the girls were tucked into their new beds in the addition, Willow and Jackson sat by the fire. These evening conversations had become a cherished ritual, a time when they could speak freely without little ears listening. "You're good with them," Willow observed, watching Jackson whittle a small wooden horse, a promised gift for Elizabeth's upcoming 5th birthday. "Natural, in a way many men aren't with children. Had plenty of younger cousins growing up," he explained, carefully shaping the horse's mane. "And I always assumed I'd have a houseful of my own someday." He blew wood shavings from the carving, examining it critically. "Life had other plans, I suppose." "Life has a way of surprising us," Willow agreed, thinking of her own journey from hopeful bride to cast-off wife to whatever she was becoming now. Jackson set aside his whittling and looked at her directly. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his tone serious enough to make Willow's hand still in her mending. "But I don't want to overstep." "Ask," she encouraged, curious about what could make this normally forthright man hesitate. "Your plans for Silver Creek," he began, then paused, seemingly gathering courage. "Have they changed at all?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Willow considered carefully before answering. "When I first decided on Silver Creek, it was out of necessity, a place far enough from Sila's where we could start fresh," she said slowly. "But now," she looked around the cabin that had become their sanctuary, "now I'm not certain what's best for us." Hope flickered across Jackson's features, quickly controlled. "The offer to stay isn't just for winter," he said quietly. "If you found reason enough to make this your home, I'd be glad of it, more than glad." The careful restraint in his voice told Willow everything he wasn't saying explicitly. This wasn't merely about practical arrangements or helping hands around the ranch. This was about something deeper, something growing between them that neither had dared name. "Jackson," she began, uncertainty making her voice soft. "My daughters are my first consideration in everything." "I can't, I know," he interrupted gently. "And that's as it should be. I'm not asking for any promises, Willow. Just don't decide to leave without considering all possibilities." The tenderness in his eyes made her heart constrict painfully. After Silas's rejection, she had armored herself against hope, against the very idea that any man might see value in her and her daughters. Jackson's simple acceptance, his apparent desire for their continued presence threatened that protective barrier. "I'll consider all possibilities," she finally promised, her voice steadier than she felt. Jackson nodded, visibly relieved. "That's all I ask for now." Winter descended in earnest, transforming the landscape into a pristine expanse of white broken only by the dark silhouettes of pine trees and distant mountains. Life settled into a rhythm dictated by necessity. Caring for the animals, maintaining the cabin, preserving their supplies, and finding ways to occupy 5 energetic girls in confined quarters. Jackson proved remarkably resourceful in the latter challenge. He taught the older girls to play checkers using buttons on a hand-drawn board, showed them how to make corn husk dolls, and began reading to them each evening from one of the few books. He owned a collection of classical myths that had the girls alternately wide-eyed with wonder and giggling at the strange names. Christmas approached, bringing with it a melancholy for Willow. However difficult her marriage to Silas had been, the holidays had always included special touches for the girls' small gifts, special foods, the traditions that created childhood memories. She worried this Christmas would feel barren by comparison. Jackson, sensing her concern without her having to voice it, disappeared one morning after chores and returned in late afternoon with a small pine tree strapped to his horse. "Thought the cabin could use some cheer," he explained as he set it up in a corner. "My mother always said a house isn't a home at Christmas without a tree." Together with the girls, they decorated it with strings of dried berries, pine cones dipped in flour paste to resemble snow, and small wooden ornaments Jackson carved in the evenings. The simple beauty of the result brought tears to Willow's eyes. "It's lovely," she said, standing back to admire their work. "Better than any tree we've ever had." On Christmas Eve, after the girls were asleep, Jackson presented Willow with a small wooden box. "Just a small token," he said, uncharacteristically nervous. "Open it now, so tomorrow can be all about the children." Inside the box lay a silver hair comb, delicately crafted with a pattern of leaves along its edge. It was clearly an expensive piece, the kind of luxury Willow hadn't possessed in years. "Jackson, I can't accept this," she protested, though her fingers traced the pattern reverently. "It's too fine." "It was my mother's," he explained. "One of the few things of hers I kept. She always said it should go to the woman who next ruled her son's household." He flushed slightly at the implication of his words. "I mean, I understand," Willow said softly, saving him from stumbling explanations. "And I'm honored." She removed the comb from its box and after a moment's hesitation placed it in her hair, securing a strand that often fell across her face. "How does it look?" The way Jackson's eyes softened as he gazed at her was answer enough, but he still said, "Beautiful. Like it was made for you." Willow felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for everything." The gesture, innocent as it was, shifted something between them. Jackson's hand came up to touch the spot where her lips had been, wonder evident in his expression. For a breathless moment, Willow thought he might pull her closer, might turn that chaste gesture into something more significant. Instead, he simply smiled, a slow, genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Merry Christmas, Willow." "Merry Christmas, Jackson," she replied, knowing that whatever happened in the days and weeks ahead, this moment would remain with her always. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, with sunlight sparkling off the snow-covered landscape. The girls woke early, their excitement palpable as they rushed to see what Santa might have left. Though Willow had worried about disappointing them, Jackson had ensured each child had something special waiting. Wooden animals he had carved for the younger girls, a hand-bound notebook with blank pages for Sarah who loved to draw, and a rag doll for Hannah with clothes Willow had secretly sewn from fabric scraps. The simple joy on their faces as they discovered these treasures was worth more than all the store-bought gifts Silas had ever reluctantly provided. Even baby Ruth seemed to sense the special nature of the day, cooing and reaching for the colorful ribbon Jackson had tied to her cradle. The winter days that followed Christmas blended together in a peaceful continuum. January brought bitterly cold temperatures that kept them mostly indoors, huddled around the fire for warmth and entertainment. February saw several massive snowstorms that Jackson battled through to check on the cattle in the lower pastures, returning each time with frost coating his beard and exhaustion lining his face. Through it all, Willow watched her daughters flourish. Hannah's cough disappeared completely. Sarah grew more confident in her reading under Jackson's patient tutelage, and even shy Elizabeth began to come out of her shell, following Jackson around the cabin, helping with his indoor projects. Ruth, now nearly 6 months old, was a plump, cheerful baby who had taken to Jackson completely, reaching for him whenever he came near her cradle. Most surprising to Willow was her own transformation. The constant anxiety that had been her companion through years of marriage to Silas, the fear of disappointing, of failing to meet impossible standards, had gradually receded. In its place grew a quiet confidence born of Jackson's consistent appreciation for her contributions, his evident pleasure in her company, and his genuine care for her daughters. By early March, when the first hints of spring began softening winter's grip, Willow had come to a decision. Silver Creek no longer called to her. The idea of leaving the ranch, of removing her daughters from the security and happiness they had found with Jackson, seemed increasingly absurd. Yet she hesitated to speak of permanent arrangements, uncertain whether Jackson's generosity might eventually wear thin, whether the novelty of an instant family might fade with time. The decision was forced upon her unexpectedly one bright March afternoon. Jackson had ridden to a neighboring ranch to help with a difficult calving, leaving Willow and the girls to enjoy the unusually warm day. Sarah and Mary were collecting eggs from the chicken coop, while Elizabeth and Hannah played a chasing game around the yard. Ruth napped in her cradle on the covered porch where Willow kept watch while mending one of Jackson's shirts. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention. 2 riders appeared on the track leading to the cabin, moving at a steady pace. Visitors were rare enough that Willow immediately felt a prickle of unease. "Girls," she called, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Come inside now, please." Something in her tone brought immediate compliance. Even Sarah, normally full of questions, hurried to the cabin without protest, carefully carrying her basket of eggs. Willow took Ruth's cradle inside, then stepped back onto the porch just as the riders reached the yard. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. Silas Harper sat atop his distinctive chestnut gelding, looking much as he had when she last saw him 5 months earlier. Beside him rode Sheriff Tillman from Clearwater Springs, a man known for his friendship with Silas and his general disregard for women's concerns. "Well, well," Silas called, his voice carrying the same mocking edge she remembered all too well. "Looks like you landed on your feet after all, Willow. Nice setup you found here." Willow's hands gripped the porch railing tightly. "What do you want, Silas?" He dismounted, handing his reins to the sheriff who remained horseback, watching the exchange with evident disinterest. "Is that any way to greet your husband?" Silas asked, approaching the steps. "You made it very clear I was no longer your wife when you cast me and our daughters out," Willow replied, standing her ground. "You have no business here." Silas's face darkened. "That's where you're wrong. I've come for my daughters." The words struck terror through Willow's heart. "Your daughters, the ones you called useless, the ones you were happy to see starve or freeze to death on the trail. Now, that's an exaggeration," Silas said, glancing back at the sheriff as if for support. "I provided a wagon and supplies. Not my fault if you couldn't manage them properly." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Things have changed, Willow. Rebecca lost our baby, a son, last month. Doctor says she might not be able to have more." Willow's stomach twisted with disgust as understanding dawned. "So now my daughters have value to you, as workers for your farm, I suppose." "They're my flesh and blood," Silas insisted, his tone growing harder. "I have rights to them, and the sheriff here agrees, so gather their things. We're leaving today." "No." The single word emerged from Willow with a force that surprised even her. "You abandoned them. You have no rights to them now." Silas's face contorted with anger. "Don't test me, woman. I'll drag them out of there myself if I have to." He moved toward the porch steps, but Willow stood firm, blocking his path. Inside, she could hear the girls whimpering in fear, recognizing their father's voice and clearly remembering the terror of the day he had cast them out. "You'll have to go through me first," Willow said, her voice steady despite the fear churning within her. "And I promise you, Silas Harper, I am not the same woman you threw away like garbage. I will fight you with everything I have." Silas laughed, the sound ugly and dismissive. "And how exactly do you plan to stop me? You're just a woman, and these are my children by law." "She's not alone." The deep voice came from behind Silas. Jackson Grayson sat atop his horse at the edge of the yard, his expression stone cold as he surveyed the scene before him. He dismounted in one fluid motion and strode forward, positioning himself between Silas and the porch steps. "This doesn't concern you, stranger," Silas said, though Willow noticed he took an instinctive step backward. Jackson's physical presence, his height advantage, and the obvious strength in his frame seemed to register with Silas immediately. "Anything that concerns Willow and her daughters concerns me," Jackson replied evenly. "And right now, it appears you're threatening them on my property." The sheriff finally spoke up, his tone bored as if the whole situation was a mere inconvenience. "Now look here, Grayson. This is a family matter. Harper here just wants to collect his children, which is his legal right." "Is that so?" Jackson asked, his gaze never leaving Silas. "Funny thing about legal rights. They tend to change when a man publicly declares he's casting off his wife and children, when he provides insufficient means for their survival, and when he makes no attempt to ensure their welfare for 5 months. "That's not," Silas began, but Jackson cut him off. "I've already spoken with Judge Harmon in Silver Creek about this very matter," Jackson continued, and Willow realized with a start that he must have anticipated something like this might happen. He was quite clear that abandonment constitutes grounds for dissolving parental rights, especially when the children's welfare was deliberately endangered. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Judge Harmon doesn't have jurisdiction in Clearwater Springs." "But he does have jurisdiction here," Jackson countered. "This ranch falls within Silver Creek's territorial boundaries, not Clearwater's. You're outside your authority, Sheriff Tillman." A tense silence fell over the yard. Silas looked between Jackson and the sheriff, clearly trying to gauge whether he could still force the issue. "There's one more thing you should consider," Jackson added, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "These girls have been through enough trauma at your hands. If you try to take them by force, you'll not only face legal consequences but my personal response. And I promise you, Harper, you won't walk away from that unscathed." The threat, delivered with such calm certainty, seemed to finally register with Silas. His bluster faltered, replaced by calculation. "They're still my blood," he insisted, though with less conviction. "Then perhaps you should have valued that connection before you discarded them," Jackson replied. "Now I suggest you leave while you still can with dignity." For a moment it seemed Silas might continue to argue, but the sheriff had already begun turning his horse. "Come on, Harper," he called. "This isn't worth the trouble. Let's head back." Defeat and resentment warred on Silas's face as he glared at Willow. "This isn't over," he warned. "It is," Willow replied with newfound confidence. "Goodbye, Silas." With a final venomous look at both Willow and Jackson, Silas mounted his horse and followed the sheriff down the track, dust rising behind them as they increased their pace. Willow sagged against the porch railing as tension drained from her body. Jackson was at her side in an instant, his arm coming around her shoulders to steady her. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes as he searched her face. "You knew," she said, looking up at him in wonder. "You anticipated he might come back for them." Jackson nodded, his expression solemn. "I considered the possibility. Men like Harper, when they realize they've made a mistake that impacts their pride or their pocket, they often try to reclaim what they threw away." His jaw tightened. "I wasn't about to let that happen to you or the girls." "Thank you," Willow whispered, overwhelmed by the realization of how completely he had been watching over them, protecting them even from threats they hadn't foreseen. The cabin door creaked open, and 5 anxious faces peered out. "Is Papa gone?" Sarah asked, her voice small with residual fear. Jackson knelt down to her level. "Yes, he's gone, and he won't be coming back to bother you again. I promise." The absolute certainty in his voice seemed to reassure not only Sarah but all the girls. They spilled onto the porch, gathering around Jackson and Willow in a tight circle. "Did you really talk to a judge about us?" Mary asked, looking up at Jackson with wide eyes. "I did," he confirmed. "Just to be sure you could stay here safely if that's what you and your mother wanted." His gaze lifted to meet Willow's, and in that moment, all the unspoken feelings between them seemed to crystallize into perfect clarity. This man had not only taken them in when they were desperate, but had taken steps to ensure their long-term security and happiness, asking nothing in return except the chance to be part of their lives. Later that evening, after the girls had been put to bed with extra stories and reassurances, Willow and Jackson sat by the fire as they had so many nights before. But tonight, a new energy hummed between them, a sense of possibility that had been unleashed by the day's events. "I need to ask you something," Willow said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Something important." Jackson set aside the bridle he'd been mending and gave her his full attention. "Anything." "When you spoke to Judge Harmon," she began, choosing her words carefully, "what exactly did you discuss regarding our situation?" A faint flush crept up Jackson's neck. "I wanted to understand the legal standing of a woman and her children in cases of abandonment," he explained. "But also, I asked about marriage laws in the territory." Willow's heart quickened at his admission. "Marriage laws. Specifically, how long a woman abandoned by her husband must wait before she can marry again," Jackson clarified, his gaze steady on hers despite the vulnerability of his confession. "The judge said that public abandonment, especially with witnesses, allows for immediate dissolution of the marriage bond." "I see," Willow said softly, hope unfurling within her chest like a flower reaching for sunlight. "And why did you need that particular information?" Jackson set aside the bridle and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. The gesture was so reminiscent of traditional proposals that Willow's breath caught in her throat. "Because from the moment I saw you standing in my yard exhausted, frightened, but still fighting for your daughters with everything you had, I knew you were extraordinary," he said, his voice low and intense. "And every day since has only confirmed that first impression. You've transformed this cabin into a home. You've brought laughter and purpose back into my life, and those 5 precious girls." His voice broke slightly. "I've come to love them as if they were my own." Tears welled in Willow's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Jackson, let me finish," he requested gently. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I know you came here out of necessity, not choice. But I want you to know that if you choose to stay, if you and the girls want to make this your permanent home, nothing would make me happier than to make it official. To be a husband to you and a father to them, if you'll have me." The simple sincerity of his proposal touched Willow more deeply than any flowery declaration could have. This wasn't a man making grandiose promises he couldn't keep. This was a man offering his heart, his home, and his life with clear-eyed understanding of what he was committing to. "The girls adore you," she said, squeezing his hands. "You've shown them what a good man truly is: kind, reliable, honest." "And their mother?" Jackson asked, hope and uncertainty mingling in his eyes. Instead of answering directly, Willow leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened as months of growing affection and restrained desire finally found expression. Jackson's arms came around her, drawing her closer as he responded with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Willow rested her forehead against his. "Does that answer your question?" she whispered. Jackson's smile was radiant. "I believe it does," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. "But I'd still like to hear the words, just to be certain." "Yes," Willow said, her voice clear and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jackson Grayson, not out of necessity or gratitude, but because I love you, because you've shown me what it means to be truly valued, truly seen." The joy that illuminated his features was all the confirmation Willow needed that she had made the right decision for herself, for her daughters, for their future together. "When?" he asked simply. "As soon as possible," Willow replied without hesitation. "The girls deserve the security of knowing this is permanent, that you're truly their father now." Jackson nodded, understanding her priority completely. "Judge Harmon comes through Silver Creek the first week of each month. We could ride there next week, make it official." "And a proper wedding later, perhaps?" Willow suggested. "When the weather's warmer, with flowers for the girls to carry." "Whatever makes you happy," Jackson promised, kissing her again more briefly but with no less feeling. "Although I should warn you, once word spreads that the confirmed bachelor Jackson Grayson is finally getting hitched, we'll have every neighbor within 50 miles wanting to attend." Willow laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Good, let them come. Let them see what we've found together." "And what have we found?" Jackson asked, his eyes twinkling. "A family," Willow answered simply. "The family we were both waiting for, even if we didn't know it." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations and adjustments. True to his word, Jackson took Willow and the girls to Silver Creek, where Judge Harmon not only performed their marriage ceremony, but signed papers officially declaring Willow Harper's parental rights terminated due to abandonment and endangerment. "Never seen a clearer case," the white-haired judge had commented after hearing the full story. "Any man who would cast out his own flesh and blood doesn't deserve the title of father. The simple ceremony in the judge's office was attended only by the girls and a few curious onlookers, but it held more genuine joy than Willow's first elaborate wedding ever had. When Jackson placed a simple gold band on her finger, it was my grandmother's. He explained and promised to love and cherish her and her daughters for all his days. Willow knew with absolute certainty that these were vows that would be kept. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. Jackson expanded the garden to accommodate their larger family, built a proper swing for the girls from an old oak tree near the cabin, and began teaching Sarah and Mary to ride their own ponies, gentle creatures he traded for with a neighboring rancher. The promised proper wedding took place in early June, when the meadow behind the cabin bloomed with wildflowers. Word had indeed spread throughout the scattered community, and nearly 30 neighbors arrived to witness the celebration. The girls wore matching dresses sewn by Willow from fabric purchased in Silver Creek, with flowers crowning their hair. Ruth, now 10 months old and determined to stand on her own, was carried by Sarah, who took her role as eldest sister very seriously. Most meaningful to Willow was the moment during the festivities when Jackson formally presented each girl with a small gift, hand-carved wooden boxes with their names engraved on the lids. "What are these for, Pa?" Elizabeth asked, already comfortable with calling Jackson by the title he had earned through love and care. "These," Jackson explained, kneeling to gather all 5 girls into a loose circle, "are for your special treasures. Things you want to keep safe forever." He opened Sarah's box to reveal a folded document inside. "And the first treasure is this paper that says you are now, officially and legally, Sarah Grayson. No one can ever take that away from you." Tears sprang to Willow's eyes as she watched her daughters examine their adoption papers with varying degrees of comprehension. Even little Ruth seemed to sense the significance of the moment, patting the paper in her box with solemn concentration. That night, after the last guest had departed and the girls slept soundly in their beds, Willow and Jackson stood on the porch, gazing at the star-filled sky above their home. "Did you ever imagine when you found us that day that this would be our future?" Willow asked, leaning against his solid warmth. Jackson's arm tightened around her waist. "Not specifically," he admitted, "but I knew something extraordinary had happened. I meant what I said that day. I had been waiting, hoping for something to change the course of my solitary life. When I saw you standing there with your 5 beautiful daughters, something inside me just recognized you. I've been waiting for you," Willow quoted softly, remembering his words from that first meeting. "I thought you were just being kind." "I was being honest," Jackson corrected, turning her gently to face him. "And every day since has proven how right that instinct was. You and the girls. You're the family I always wanted but feared I'd never find." The absolute conviction in his voice warmed Willow to her core. For so long under Silas's cruel dominion, she had believed her worth was diminished by each daughter she bore. Jackson had shown her the truth, that her daughters were blessings, that she herself was valuable not for what she could provide a man but for who she was. "I love you, Jackson Grayson," she said simply, reaching up to touch his face. "And I love you, Willow Grayson," he replied, the name still new enough to bring a smile to both their lips. "You and our daughters, our daughters." The simple phrase encompassed so much: Jackson's complete acceptance of her children, his commitment to their future, the family they had forged from circumstances that once seemed hopeless. As if to underscore the point, a cry came from inside the cabin. Ruth, likely seeking a midnight feeding. Without hesitation, Jackson pressed a quick kiss to Willow's lips. "I'll get her," he said. "You've been on your feet all day with the celebration." Watching him disappear into the cabin, Willow felt a profound gratitude wash over her. The path that had led her here had been difficult, even devastating at times. Being cast out by Silas had seemed like the end of everything: her security, her identity, perhaps even her children's futures. Instead, it had been the beginning of something far more precious. A genuine partnership built on mutual respect and love, a home where daughters were treasured, not merely tolerated, and a life richer than any she could have imagined in her darkest moments on that lonely trail. From inside came the soft murmur of Jackson's voice as he soothed Ruth back to sleep, a sound so ordinary yet so extraordinary in its representation of the man he was: patient, gentle, unfailingly kind. Willow smiled up at the vast Wyoming sky, stars winking like promises in the velvet darkness, and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving. For the first time in her adult life, she felt completely at home, not just in this place, but in her own skin, in her role as mother and wife, in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. With Jackson Grayson, the man who had been waiting for her all along, even before he knew her name. 5 years later, the Grayson Ranch had prospered beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as Jackson's modest operation had expanded to include a thriving cattle business, an orchard of young apple trees, and a reputation throughout the region for fine horses bred and trained on the property. The cabin, too, had grown, with additional rooms built as the family's needs evolved. What had once been a bachelor's sparse dwelling was now an established homestead, with a proper kitchen, separate bedrooms for the girls grouped by age, and even a small library where Jackson and Willow encouraged their daughter's education during the months when traveling to the Silver Creek schoolhouse proved impossible. On a warm September afternoon, Willow stood on the porch, watching Jackson work with Sarah in the corral. At 12, her eldest daughter showed remarkable skill with horses, having inherited her stepfather's natural way with animals. Tall for her age, with Willow's auburn hair but eyes that somehow matched Jackson's in intensity if not color, Sarah had blossomed under his mentorship. "Keep your hands soft on the reins," Jackson called as Sarah guided a spirited 2-year-old filly around the enclosure. "She's got a sensitive mouth. She'll respond better to suggestion than command." Mary and Elizabeth sat on the fence, watching their sister with undisguised admiration, while Hannah played nearby with 3-year-old Thomas, Jackson and Willow's son, who had arrived 9 months after their wedding. Ruth, now nearly 6, sat on the porch steps, meticulously drawing in the sketchbook Jackson had given her for her last birthday, already showing artistic talent that surprised and delighted her parents. The sound of an approaching wagon drew Willow's attention. She shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun and recognized the Jenkins family from a neighboring ranch, likely stopping by on their way back from Silver Creek. "Visitors," she called to Jackson, who nodded and helped Sarah dismount before opening the corral gate. Margaret Jenkins, a plump, cheerful woman who had become one of Willow's closest friends in the territory, waved enthusiastically as her husband guided their wagon into the yard. "Brought your mail," she called as the wagon came to a stop. "And news from town." The arrival of mail was always an event, and the girls quickly gathered around as Margaret handed Willow a small packet of letters secured with string. But it was the news Margaret was clearly bursting to share that held everyone's attention. "The railroad's coming through," she announced triumphantly. "Not right to Silver Creek, mind you, but close enough, just 10 miles south. They're starting construction next spring, and they say it'll be finished by end of next year." The implications of this development weren't lost on any of the adults present. The railroad would transform the region, bringing easier access to markets for their cattle and horses, reducing the isolation of their lives, increasing property values, and offering educational opportunities that had been difficult to access previously. "That is news indeed," Jackson said, removing his hat to wipe his brow. "Have they settled on the exact route?" While the men discussed the technical details of the railroad's path, Margaret drew Willow aside, her expression shifting to one of controlled excitement. "There's one more thing," she said quietly, glancing to ensure the children weren't listening closely. "They're planning to build a proper school in Silver Creek, not just the one-room schoolhouse, but a real academy that will take students through higher education, girls included." She squeezed Willow's arm meaningfully. "Your Sarah's getting to the age where such opportunities matter." Willow's heart swelled with gratitude for her friend's consideration. Education for her daughters had been a constant concern, one that Jackson shared wholeheartedly. They had done their best with the limited resources available: books ordered from catalogs, the small lending library in Silver Creek, and Jackson's own surprisingly extensive knowledge of literature and mathematics. But formal education beyond basic reading and arithmetic was hard to come by in the territory, particularly for girls. "That would be wonderful," Willow agreed, watching Sarah, who now stood with Jackson, both of them examining the filly's leg with serious concentration. "Sarah's got a quick mind." "All the girls do." "Well, Robert Jenkins might not see the sense in educating girls beyond what they need for running a household," Margaret said with a dismissive wave toward her husband. "But I've always said your daughters have a special spark about them. They deserve every chance." After the Jenkins family departed, promising to return the following week for a planned community gathering, Willow shared Margaret's news about the school with Jackson as they prepared dinner together. The girls were outside completing their evening chores, giving the adults a rare moment alone. "An academy in Silver Creek," Jackson mused, slicing bread with careful precision. "That would change things considerably." "For the better, don't you think?" Willow asked, stirring the venison stew that simmered on the stove. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Absolutely. I've been concerned about Sarah especially. She's so bright, Willow. She deserves more than just the basics we can provide here." "All the girls do," Willow agreed, feeling the familiar surge of protective ambition that had defined her motherhood. "I don't want them limited by circumstance or tradition." Jackson set down his knife and turned to face her fully, his expression serious but warm. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," he admitted. "About their futures. Sarah's already showing such aptitude with the horses and the business side of the ranch. Mary has that way with growing things. Did you see the herbs she cultivated this summer? And Elizabeth with her head always in a book." He smiled fondly. "They're all extraordinary in their own ways. I want them to have every opportunity to develop those gifts." The fact that Jackson saw his daughters now in every way that mattered with such clear-eyed appreciation of their individual strengths never failed to move Willow. It was so different from Silas's dismissive grouping of them as useless girls that sometimes the contrast still took her breath away. "What about you?" she asked, reaching out to touch his arm. "The railroad will bring changes to the ranch operation too. Are you ready for that?" "Change is the one constant in life," Jackson replied philosophically. "My father used to say that. The key is to shape it to your advantage rather than being swept along by it." He covered her hand with his own. "We've built something strong here, Willow. Strong enough to weather change, even benefit from it." They were interrupted by the thunderous arrival of their children, bursting through the door with the controlled chaos that characterized family life. Thomas raced to his father, demanding to be lifted high, while the girls chattered excitedly about their day's accomplishments. Later that evening, with the younger children asleep and the older girls reading quietly in their room, Willow and Jackson sat on the porch swing he had built the previous summer. The sky blazed with stars, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and late-blooming wildflowers. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Willow asked softly, leaning against Jackson's solid warmth. "If Silas hadn't cast us out, if we hadn't found our way here." Jackson was silent for a moment, his arm tightening slightly around her shoulders. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not with regret, more with a sense of, I don't know, wonder perhaps, at how the most difficult moments can lead to the greatest blessings." "That day feels so distant now," Willow mused, "almost like it happened to someone else. When I remember how afraid I was, how desperate." "You were magnificent," Jackson interrupted gently. "Standing up to him today with everything we've built together behind you, that would be one thing. But then, with nothing but courage and love for your daughters to sustain you." That was truly remarkable. The admiration in his voice warmed Willow deeply. "I didn't feel remarkable. I felt terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear," Jackson reminded her, a phrase he often used with the girls when they faced challenges. "It's action in the face of it." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic creaking of the swing blending with the night sounds of the ranch's distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, an owl's haunting call from the nearby woods. "5 daughters," Jackson said suddenly, a smile evident in his voice. "And a son. Who would have thought the thing Silas Harper despised most about you would become our greatest joy?" Willow turned her face up to his, illuminated in the soft glow spilling from the cabin windows. "You saw their value from the beginning," she said, "even when I was afraid no one else ever would." "I saw your value too," Jackson corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. "A woman strong enough to face the wilderness for her children's sake, gentle enough to create a home from nothing, and brave enough to trust again after betrayal. How could I not fall in love with you?" Even after 5 years of marriage, his words could still make her heart race. Willow leaned up to kiss him, a gesture that began tenderly but quickly deepened with the passion that remained as strong between them as the day they had first acknowledged their feelings. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said that day you arrived here," he murmured. "I had been waiting for you. I just didn't know it until I saw you standing there with your 5 beautiful daughters, looking like you might fight a bear with your bare hands if it threatened them." Willow laughed softly at the image. "I probably would have tried, though I'm grateful it never came to that. The point is," Jackson continued, his voice growing serious again, "what Silas saw as your greatest failure was actually the path that led you here, to a life where those daughters are recognized for the blessings they truly are." The profound truth of his observation settled over Willow like a comfortable blanket. From the bitter rejection that had nearly destroyed her, she had found her way to this man, this home, this life filled with purpose and love. "I sometimes wonder if he knows," she admitted. "Silas, I mean. If he's heard how well the girls are doing, how the ranch has prospered." Jackson considered this. "Would it matter to you if he did?" Willow thought carefully before answering. "Not for revenge or vindication," she said slowly, "but perhaps as a lesson. That value isn't always where we expect to find it, that what one person rejects, another may treasure." "A worthy lesson," Jackson agreed, "though I doubt Silas Harper has the wisdom to learn it." He kissed her forehead gently. "But we have, and more importantly, our daughters have. They know they're valued for exactly who they are, not for what someone else might have wished them to be." As if summoned by their discussion, the cabin door opened, and Sarah stepped onto the porch, a book clutched in her hands. At 12, she stood on the cusp of womanhood, her features beginning to shed their childish roundness, her eyes holding a seriousness beyond her years. "Pa," she said hesitantly, "could I ask you something about this mathematics problem? I've tried 3 different approaches, but the answer still doesn't match the one in the back of the book." Jackson immediately shifted to make space for her on the swing. "Let's have a look," he invited warmly. As Sarah settled between them, explaining her calculation process with impressive precision, Willow watched the interaction with a full heart. This moment, a father patiently guiding his daughter's intellectual growth, a young girl confident enough to seek help without fear of dismissal, embodied everything she had once feared her children would never experience. The future stretched before them, bright with possibilities that once seemed impossibly distant. The academy in Silver Creek, the opportunities the railroad would bring, the ranch that continued to prosper under their joint stewardship, all would provide their children with choices Willow herself had never been offered. But more valuable than any material success or educational opportunity was the foundation they had built together. A home where daughters were cherished, where strength was recognized in many forms, where love grew stronger with each passing season. As Sarah and Jackson bent their heads together over the mathematics book, their profiles illuminated by the gentle lamplight from within the cabin, Willow offered a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever fate, providence, or divine intervention had led her to this place. From the darkest moment of her life had come its greatest blessings. From rejection had come acceptance. From desperation had come abundance. And from a simple greeting, "I've been waiting for you," had come a lifetime of love, purpose, and belonging.